welcome to the Phil Zimmermann lecture, and we're absolutely honored to have him here. But just a few words of context setting. As you know, the OII has always been dedicated to doing work that is engaging the social implications of information and communication technology. And there's probably a few stories in the computing world that are as nice a fit. Okay, here you have a gentleman that came up with a visionary idea about what should be done to encrypt messages and email and so forth, and develop some shareware around that. So an idea that had real visions about the potential social issues around computing and telecommunications. And it's not just become an idea that was neat, but something that's actually been taken, implemented, used as shareware, but then has become a business that is worldwide. I think over 80 countries, or well, anyway, it's a global business called PGP. Phil Zimmermann was the founding director of PGP. But what I've invited, because there's so many connections between PGP, we've had the really good fortune of running across Phil Dunkelberger, the president and CEO of PGP. I ran across him. He invited me to a meeting, a dinner in London with other people in the privacy and security community. And it was like a Oxford dinner symposium forum in which it was a really excellent discussion of current developments in the field. What are the social issues around this? What are people thinking about? It was a valuable discussion of ideas, and we knew that there'd be some opportunities to do things between PGP and the OII. Phil Dunkelberger has been, not only is he president and CEO of PGP, but he's been in the computing industry for quite some time. You were involved with Xerox PARC. He has a technical but also a business understanding of the field and how to bring an idea to the world and in ways that really make a difference in the area of one of the most important areas. Of course, that's all history, and Phil Zimmermann's going to talk about what he's thinking about now. But I've asked Phil Dunkelberger to introduce our speaker because I think he's better positioned to know more about him than I do. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'd just like to say thank you for everybody for coming. We have a great interest in furthering the understanding between the social implications of computing. PGP was founded on that, and we've continued to work on that and be true to Phil's original values. In 1991, Phil Zimmermann saw a need of the coming of the internet that you'd have to defend data anywhere all the time, because he kept saying that, glory be, governments might be listening to your phone calls or reading your email, and people said, that'll never happen. Well, as we've seen all over the world now, that is happening at a more frequent level. He originally built a product to be a human rights product. It was to protect people in South America and Central America that were speaking out against their governments and not having any protection or ability to communicate freely. And I think his call to action was very much prophecy. And as we see in 2007, the world hasn't gotten to be a safer place. It's gotten to be a more dangerous place. Civil liberties and the social parts of computing have gotten to be very, very convoluted, and in some cases very dangerous also, from what you can speak out and what you can say. So it's going to be very interesting to hear Phil's views on not only the past of PGP, but I'm sure you'll find his views on new technologies like voice over IP and the other things he's currently working on very interesting. So without further ado, the person you came to see, Phil Zimmermann.
Oh, that's right. I have this. You can only work on one project for so long before you have to find something new to do. And so, PGP's been around for 15 years, and it's time to do new stuff. So 10 years ago, I wanted to do secure VoIP, and I did a project called PGP Phone. The problem is the internet wasn't ready. Nobody had broadband. There were no VoIP standards. And so, it wasn't ready. But now the internet is ready for it, because VoIP is here. The internet's ready for VoIP, so it's ready for secure VoIP. So now I'm doing a similar protocol as PGP phone, but brought up to date with all the modern VoIP protocols. So I couldn't call it PGP phone because you know, it's not PGP, and I don't own the trademark anymore. So I couldn't think of a name, and somebody suggested Z-phone, so that was kind of a temporary working title name, you know, and it kind of stuck. And I wish somebody would sue me to get me to change the name, like it's already taken or something, but it hasn't happened yet, so I'm kind of stuck with the name Z-phone. But you know, during the 1990s, the public policy debate around cryptography was mostly about a kind of like a zero-sum game between civil liberties and law enforcement, or civil liberties and national security. There was a lot of tension between those two opposing forces, you know, a lot of countries had laws that limited the use of cryptography in one way or another. In the United States, it was all about export controls. In Britain, there were domestic controls and export controls. In France, there were domestic controls. In fact, in France had the heaviest domestic controls of the three. I don't think the French were that big on export controls. They'll pretty much export anything anywhere, and they don't care so much about that, but they were trying to limit it in France. But the French also wanted to move into the internet. They had been heavily dependent on Minitel, and so they wanted to embrace the economic benefits of the internet. So they realized that they would have to lift their domestic controls. The three countries that had the heaviest controls on cryptography in one form or another were the US, the UK, and France. The French were the first to relax theirs. They totally relaxed their domestic controls. The British also relaxed some of their controls. I don't remember now the details of which ones this was almost a decade ago. And then the Americans finally realized that they just couldn't hold things up anymore on their own. And it was an election year in 2000. They finally lifted their export controls in 2000. And also, you know, California was an important state in the election. So since all of the entire computer industry was in favor of lifting the export controls, they pretty much had to do it. So, but during the 1990s, it was all about the tensions between law enforcement and national security over here, and privacy and civil liberties over here. And so it was this kind of zero-sum game. Well, we pretty much won that part of it, where there's been an erosion of civil liberties in the United States since 9/11, but there has not been a reimposition of export controls. There has not been an imposition of domestic controls. In the 90s, they did try some domestic controls in the form of the Clipper chip. How many people here remember the Clipper chip? Okay, and how many people don't know what the Clipper chip is? Okay, and how many people didn't raise their hands because they didn't want anyone to know that they didn't know what this is? That was an encryption device that the government wanted to put in telephones that would have a key burned inside of each chip, a unique key, that the government would keep in a vast government database for wiretap purposes. And for some reason, that wasn't popular. I don't know why, but so they had to abandon that plan, and they never went back to it. Even after 9/11, they never went back to it. So I think that you know, we've kind of won on that front, but I think that you know, now that VoIP is poised to take off, a lot of people ask when we talk about VoIP encryption, they say, well, aren't you worried about the government trying to impose some controls on VoIP encryption? And it's a good question because you know, we all think of telephone calls as being something that the government really likes to monitor. Well, what I'd like to do is to try to make the case that I think we could look at this in a different way. Something has happened between the 1990s and now. What has happened is that we've become aware of the terrible effects of organized crime on the internet. We never imagined that things would get as bad as they are. You know, you hook up your computer, your Windows computer, to the internet if you're not behind a firewall, and within a couple of minutes it's taken over by hostile software. And that hostile software is put there by organized crime. It's phishing attacks. You know, your PC is hosting a website to look like Citibank. Yeah?
Can I just say that's before Service Pack 2 of Windows XP, the sort of 30 seconds thing?
Yes, so now it's a slightly different duration of time. Yeah, that's good. It's good. That's comforting. I use a Mac myself, so it doesn't happen to me. Haven't seen you for a while, Casper. It's, yeah, yeah. You know, we now see that you know, I've got a server at home, and I have it hooked up with on the console. I can see the attacks constantly scrolling of people attacking my server, and you know, I'm running a good operating system. It's FreeBSD. It's locked down pretty tight, so I don't think anything is getting through. But you can still see the attacks scrolling by from all over the world. And it's like being inside of an armored personnel carrier and listening to the bullets hitting the outside. It's hard to sleep, you know, with all those, that sound. It doesn't make any sound effects. If it did make sound effects, it probably would be hard to sleep. So that's the incredibly hostile environment the internet has become. And I think that when VoIP grows big enough, when it begins to take over from the public switch telephone network, it will become an attractive target for organized crime. It's not that attractive a target right now. It's not big enough right now, but it will grow. Everyone knows it's going to grow. Everyone knows that eventually VoIP will replace the public switch telephone network. It will take some years, but it'll cross a threshold where it will become interesting enough to organized crime, and they will begin attacking it with the same ferocity that they attack the internet today. The rest of the internet today. Now, there's different ways they might attack it for different reasons. One of them is to capture the contents. One of the computers in your company, for example, might be infected with spyware that could intercept the phone calls on your local network in your company. Depends on how you've got your network configured. There's ways to do it where you can ameliorate that. But if you have some spyware that could watch the internet traffic on your local network and find the VoIP traffic and capture it and put it on the disk, it can organize the phone call as WAV files and let you browse through them like a TiVo player. But you could do the browsing from the other side of the world. So there might be somebody in China or in the Russian mafia or from, you know, or I guess because we're in the UK, you know, I can even say a foreign country like the United States. But the United States thinks of, you know, people in Europe attacking them. So, you know, it used to be to do wiretapping, somebody had to get close to you. They had to be outside your office with some alligator clips. They don't have to be outside your office with alligator clips. They can be on the other side of the world. And they could just browse the calls they want to browse. Law enforcement is probably going to be concerned about VoIP encryption as interfering with lawful interception. You know, in the United States we have CALIA. I'm certain you have a British equivalent to that. I don't know what it's called here. I should know these things. There's a group in here called FIPR that I'm on the advisory board for. Foundation for Information Policy Research. Right. I should know that. You know, I've only had a couple hours sleep for the last couple of nights because I keep staying up until 6 a.m. because it's in California a lot earlier. But I keep waking up early for the meetings, so I knew what FIPR was just an hour ago. But anyway, a lot of countries have laws requiring the phone companies grant access to the government. Nearly every country has such laws. But when we move to VoIP, things are going to have to change, because historically there has been a very strong asymmetry in the difficulty of wiretapping of the public switch telephone network. It's been easy for the government to wiretap it, and difficult for criminals to wiretap it. But as we migrate to VoIP, that asymmetry collapses. This is a natural consequence of the technology. With the collapse of that asymmetry, law enforcement suddenly finds itself in a completely different environment. The asymmetry that they enjoyed disappears. And then it becomes possible for organized crime to wiretap prosecutors and judges. And they can listen to the details of ongoing criminal investigations. These could be violent criminals, drug criminals, mafia, all kinds of, terrible violent criminals, listening to the names of witnesses and informants. They could listen to prosecutors calling their wives at home and talking to them about what time to pick up their kids at school. And I think that in the long run, law enforcement will eventually realize that it's in their best interest to have VoIP encryption. And they might not see it now, but I think that they will eventually come to realize it. There are some that do. I did a podcast interview a couple of weeks ago with some guy runs a website who's a federal agent who makes a podcast on forensic stuff, and his audience is a lot of U.S. attorneys, and so he saw it that way, and in fact he suggested that I find some opportunity to speak at the Justice Department and spread this idea to them. That would be quite an experience, I think. So I think that if you try to think about what would the effects be on law enforcement and the criminal justice system as a whole, if you had such an environment where you had organized crime or wiretapping law enforcement and judges and prosecutors, think about the 13 journalists that were murdered in Russia for criticizing Putin. And think about the overall effects on journalism as a whole throughout Russia as a result of those 13 assassinations. It's a small number compared to the number of journalists operating in Russia, but the effects on the whole of journalism in Russia is enormous. And ask yourself, how many cases would it take in Britain or the US or any of the Western European countries for tragic incidents like that to affect law enforcement, the criminal justice system, their ability to prosecute criminals? It wouldn't take that many incidents. And while most IT departments and most police departments and courthouses and other, in Scotland Yard and other, places that have the criminal justice apparatus, I'm sure that in most cases, in nearly all cases, the IT departments will have effective firewalls and will keep out the spyware and will have their networks wired up in a way that will be resistant to this. But it just won't take that many breaches before it has some high-profile effects. So I think that it's in the interest, and that's purely looking at it from a law enforcement perspective, of just its effects on law enforcement. Of course, the effects will also be throughout the rest of society. The burden on law enforcement when economic crime against the rest of society is so affected. You have businesses with wiretapping going on to listen to insider trading information, trade secrets, other kinds of things. You have maybe the criminals would like to listen to the CEO talking to the CEO of another company that might be an acquisition target. or maybe they want to listen to the in-house legal counsel talking to the outside law firm. But it's probably going to result in insider trading. Some guys in Kazakhstan will get rich, and nobody will know why, but the price of the stock will go up or down, or, well, fluctuate, and they'll benefit from that. We need to, we have no choice. We have to encrypt VoIP. If we're going to, either that or we just don't migrate to VoIP. We just stay with the PSTN. The public switch telephone network has served us for a century. We could just stay with it. But I'm sure that everybody here knows that we can't stop the migration to VoIP. It's a kind of a manifest destiny. So we're going to have to encrypt it. So I think that rather than the old paradigm of the 1990s, where there's a zero-sum game between law enforcement and national security on one side and civil liberties and privacy on the other, I think that we now have a situation where governments are going to recognize the value of encryption. They already do recognize the value of encryption in other domains. In email encryption, disk encryption, you know, the US government now mandates that all government laptops have to have encryption. In the 90s, it was kind of legally dodgy to have encryption, to have strong encryption. I remember traveling in France with PGP in my laptop and feeling like, gee, I hope they don't catch me, you know. But now the legal climate has changed. Now the legal climate encourages it. It's, you know, there's a whole body of laws that encourage the use of encryption. HIPAA in the United States requires that medical records be encrypted. There's also breach laws, breach disclosure laws. It started in California with the Senate Bill 1386. It said that if a company loses some database of customer identities, that they have to tell their customers about it. And so a stolen laptop with you know, 1 million customer names on it could be an extremely embarrassing event for a company. They're required by law to own up to it. And that is more effective in punishing the company than paying a heavy fine. The heavy fine is probably not as big as the loss of business and the shame. You guys should enact similar legislation here. You already do have a requirement to pay a fine for some of those situations, but I think you should follow up with also a requirement to disclose it. There's also other laws that don't mention encryption but still encourage it. Sarbanes-Oxley is some legislation in the U.S. that requires companies do best practices to protect their, you know, their business activities, and this usually encourages them to encrypt things. So the whole legal environment is friendlier now. So I think that if you look at this trend, we're probably going to see it eventually spread to VoIP. Now, right now, there hasn't been a lot of government responses to encrypted VoIP, mostly because VoIP is not encrypted. But I think soon we're going to see VoIP starting to be encrypted. At least I hope so. Hope it's encrypted with my stuff. I guess there's not really, we don't need to, I would encourage you to visit this website. And here, this is, I have this software, Z-Phone here. Wait. This little animated GIF is a user interface here for Z-Phone. Anyway, take a look at this. I'm not going to keep this up here, but it's zphoneproject.com, and or go to my website, philzimmermann.com. I'm going to take this down because I don't want you trying to read the fine print. Well, I like the Larry Lessig view of the Larry Lessig method of showing slides, not the not putting slides up that have a lot of intricate information. So I'd like to open it up for questions to get an idea of what you're interested in. Yeah.
How would you compare this with John Walker's project of a decade ago? He offered, you may still be able to get the code off his site, but the former head of Autodesk created an encrypted VoIP package that he was distributing, but then he expressed disgust at the lack of persistent IP addresses.
That's right. Well, that was an example of the internet not being ready for VoIP. It's not encrypted VoIP, it just wasn't ready for VoIP, period. But now there's a whole VoIP industry built around new standards that overcome those problems. Well, that almost overcome those problems. NAT traversal is kind of a bugaboo for VoIP, but they're working on it. They're getting better at it. Skype has done pretty well at NAT traversal. And Skype even encrypts their stuff, but they won't tell you how they encrypt it. And I'm of the opinion that it's better not to trust encryption unless you know what it does. Yeah.
Arguably, one of the reasons for the success of PGP was the fact it had an open protocol that was reasonably robust and extensible. Is the new Z phone similarly built around an open standard?
Yes, it is. It's open in a lot of ways. I've submitted an internet draft along with John Callis, who's the CTO of PGP, and Alan Johnston, who was one of the co-authors of the SIP RFC. SIP is the protocol that is really the foundation of all of VoIP. And we'll have to see what the internet, the IETF, does with it. There's actually quite a bit of competition between different VoIP encryption protocols. There are other ones that I think they're not as good as mine. So I'm hoping that the IETF will prefer mine. There's also the openness of I publish the source code. And in fact, I go beyond publishing the source code. I also have I open source it with a dual licensing strategy. It's GPL'd so that you could stick it into GPL projects. It's also commercially licensed, which is how I'm actually making money. So if you want to use it for commercial projects, you come to me for a commercial license, and if you want to stick it in your GPL project, you can do that too. But it's open for peer review. I just refuse to trust encryption software that doesn't publish source code. You have to publish your source code and publish the protocol.
So a quick question.
People could I'm sorry, I couldn't say so before, but introduce yourselves, please.
Casper Bowden.
I'm Casper Bowden, and
I never pronounced your name right. I always said it Bowden, and I was always wrong all these years.
A long time ago, I used to be director of FIPR, and for the past 5 years, I've been chief privacy advisor for Microsoft in Europe.
So Casper, my moment of forgetting the acronym, what it stood for, I was hoping that the rest of the guys at FIPR would not find out about that. You've destroyed my hopes that they will find out about it now by reminding me that you were a former director.
So there's a short question and a longer question. The short question is, can we please have a Vista version soon? Because I don't think there is currently. And the longer question is, I don't know if it's possible to explain this because it takes us into quite deep waters, but I think maybe a lot of the people here would be interested to know how it is that you can do Z-Phone without a man-in-the-middle attack, which is a really cunning idea. And if one can explain that, I think that's a really, really cunning thing to get over.
So you've looked at the protocol. You know what I do. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. All right. I'd like to explain that. Well, okay. Let me explain what the man-in-the-middle attack is. What it is you know that the way you make secure phones, all of these secure phone protocols, they have public key cryptography. They do it in some form or other. I use Diffie-Hellman, which is the best public key algorithm that's the best fit for phones. You could do it with RSA, but it wouldn't be as good because RSA tends to be persistent keys, and it's better if you're using ephemeral keys that you can throw away at the end of the call. But this protocol, it has perfect forward secrecy, which means that the keys are created at the beginning of the call and they're destroyed at the end of the call, and so there's nothing you you're not going to have any future disclosure of key material that can retroactively compromise a recorded phone call, if they recorded the encrypted part of the traffic. So, but what if there were phones that did this protocol, and you could just go down to Marks and Spencer and buy them, and for £100 or maybe £50 someday, and you bring them home and you plug in your 50-pound phone and just start calling people with it, and everybody's got one of these phones. Well, what if Casper, Marks and Spencer, we're buying it Marks and Spencer. What if Casper goes and buys his phone from Marks and Spencer, but Phil Dunkelberger wants to listen to my call to Casper. It's sleep deprivation, if my eyes glaze over and you snap your fingers in front of my face and do this, then you'll know that it finally caught up with me. The names go first, But anyway, so Phil Dunkelberger wants to be a man in the middle, so he gets in the middle. He's gone down to Marks and Spencer and bought 2 of these phones, okay? So he's sitting in the middle with 2 of these phones. And when I try to call Casper, I dial Casper's number, and Phil has rewired the connection between us so that it rings his phone instead, one of his 2 phones. And it rings his phone, and he sees the caller ID that it's me calling, and he knows that I'm calling Casper. So he hits the speed dial button on his other phone, and it rings Casper. So now Phil is in the middle. As soon as Casper answers, Phil answers my phone, and he takes the 2 phones, and he holds them up with the handsets, and he inverts one of them like that, so that it's in this kind of 69 position, and it's kind of this rather lewd configuration, and then he can listen to the traffic, through the air gap. He can put his ear up to the gap and listen to Casper and I speaking to each other. Now what's happened is that we've got a man in the middle who might not even know the mathematics of public key cryptography, might not know how to, even program a computer, but he can buy 2 phones. Actually, Dunk is pretty smart, so he probably would know about how to do this. But say he doesn't. He just buys 2 phones. He doesn't need to know the Diffie-Hellman algorithm. He doesn't need to know about cryptography. He doesn't need to know about the advanced encryption standard or any of the protocols we're using. All he's got to do is buy 2 phones. So he spends twice as much as Casper and I each spent. So now he can listen to the calls. And the way Casper and I would detect that is, well, I've got an encrypted link to the man in the middle, and Casper has another encrypted link to the man in the middle. Both of those encrypted links are using different encryption keys, session keys, because they're random keys. They're different, but Casper and I believe that they would be the same normally, because we're talking to each other. They would be the same key. What they aren't the same key. So we need to figure out a way of detecting that they aren't the same key. Well, what if we had a display on the phone that could display the key, and we read it aloud? Well, that's probably not a good idea. Reading the key aloud, let's not do that. How about if we hash the key and read the hash aloud, a cryptographic one-way function, a hash function, and we read that aloud? Now that's a better idea. We would find that it's not the same hash, because there's a man in the middle. That would tell us that, okay, we better talk about the weather or something, or else tell the man in the middle that we know he's there. He's probably figured it out because he heard us read the hash aloud, and he knows that it wasn't the same. So the problem with these cryptographic hashes, though, is that they are too long. Anybody who's gone to a PGP key signing party knows that these hashes can be quite long, and if you're going to a PGP key signing party that was probably scheduled weeks in advance and is attended only by ultra geeks, uber geeks, who want to stand up and read, 20 bytes of, hex digits, in this kind of ritual kind of geekiness, it's kind of fun socially, I guess, but I don't think that you're going to do it for every phone call. So, Now, how many people here know what the Diffie-Hellman algorithm is? Okay, and how many people don't? Okay, and how many people didn't raise their hand in either case? Okay, you see, you're lying because I know that you didn't, and you still didn't even on the third question. So, well, what can happen is, suppose we just say we're going to read 1 byte of the hash, just so it's short and easy to read. The man in the middle could he could perform a whole bunch of Diffie-Hellman calculations, hundreds of them, perhaps even thousands of them, until he finds a matching hash that's the same byte, or even if it's 2 bytes, that would be the same on one side as it is on the other side. And we do, I don't know how deep to go into the protocol, but we do something in the protocol to prevent that from happening. We do a hash commitment. Instead of me sending you my Diffie-Hellman public parameter immediately, I send a hash of it first. And then you take your Diffie-Hellman public parameter and you send it to me. And then after I get yours, I send you my real Diffie-Hellman public parameter. You then hash it and compare it to the hash that I sent. And if they match, we proceed with the protocol. The man in the middle, it doesn't have simultaneous possession of each of our 2 Diffie-Hellman public parameters, and thus cannot calculate a third Diffie-Hellman public parameter of his own that would cause the same hash to appear on both sides. So he's not in possession of enough information before he has to give his Diffie-Hellman parameter. Well, this means he only gets 1 guess. If he only gets 1 guess, this authentication string that we compare can be actually quite short. If it's only 16 bits, that means he only has 1 chance out of 65,000 of getting it right. He can't make 2 guesses. He gets exactly 1 guess. Now, most wiretappers don't want to get caught. And so if they were presented with the daunting odds of only 1 chance in 65,000 of not getting caught, they're never going to take the risk. They're never going to do the man-in-the-middle attack. So 16 bits is enough. It so happens that we actually display more than 16 bits. We do a few bits more than that. So it's actually 20 bits. So it's 1 chance out of 1,000,000 of not getting caught. But, you know, a lot of people wouldn't bother to compare it anyway because, you know, even though it's short, people aren't that geeky. But on the other hand, the man in the middle doesn't know that you're not going to compare them. He might fear that you would, so he would be deterred from attacking. But maybe he knows that you're pretty lazy and maybe he'll take the risk. But, you know, another thing is I think that there's value in relying on the natural behavior of human beings. A lot of people, when they listen to this description of this authentication protocol, they say, well, you know, people are just going to be too lazy to do it. It doesn't sound very good to me. It could be attacked because people just aren't going to bother to check. But the fact is that in ordinary human conversation, people are consciously aware of, are they talking about something that they, you know, would prefer that not be overheard? I mean, imagine if you're physically in a room with a bunch of people standing around and you're talking to someone next to you. You might, if you're talking about the weather, you can just talk in a normal tone of voice. But if you're going to be talking about something confidential, you might lean over and lower your voice when you talk to them. Because right at that moment, you know that this particular sentence is one that I better lean over and lower my voice. They just know it. And so people can check the short authentication string when they feel like it, which would be actually pretty rarely, because most of the time people talk about the weather. Once in a while, they talk about confidential matters, and so they could check the authentication string when they feel they need to, and they don't bother to check it at other times. It's kind of like, you know, it's kind of like that segue thing that you know, the two-wheeled vehicle that people ride around on. You lean forward when you want to go forward. You lean back when you want to slow down or go backwards. You can lean left or right and steer with your body language. It's a kind of a natural, organic way to steer a vehicle. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Well, the early ones you did, but now you can actually just do it entirely by leaning. They got a new one that lets you do that. I just read it on Wikipedia last night. Yeah. And it's a new generation one, but they haven't lowered the price. They keep on making improvements, but keeping the price point because the same. You know, it's like personal computers, right? Anyway, so you can rely on you know, it's sort of organic behavior of human beings. People instinctively know what they want, and they'll check it when they feel like it. They'll check it when they think it's confidential, and they won't bother when it's not. And you know, if you can't handle that, then well, you know, maybe you're being too anal about it. But wait a minute, you know, this is not all there is in the protocol. There's something else. How many people here have used SSH? Okay, a lot of people. And how many people have not used SSH? Okay, I think that actually added up to the total number of people in the room this time. So you guys are getting better. All right, SSH, you know, is for remote logins, and it's an encrypted protocol. And the way it works is the first time you talk to a computer remotely, you cache some key material. And it is possible that there could be a man-in-the-middle attack in the first session, but probably there won't be one because maybe the man-in-the-middle wasn't interested in wiretapping you at that moment. He usually develops an interest later on. So if he's not there in the first session because of the cached key material, it's used in the next session and he's locked out of the next session. So I'm using the same technique. What I do is on the first phone call, I cache some key material. And remember I told you that it destroys the keys at the end of the call? Well, yes, it does. But before it destroys them, it hashes them and stores a hash. And the next call, it compares that hash. Well, it hashes it again to do the compare in the protocol. And it says, oh, do you have any shared secrets from our last call? Yes or no? You know, and we figure out if it's the same. And if it is, we mix it in. We do another Diffie-Hellman exchange like we always do with every call. But we mix in the hash from the previous call. So if there was no man in the middle before, there won't be a man in the middle now. There can't be. So he's locked out if he's not there in the first call. So it's kind of like SSH. SSH has been using this principle of key continuity for quite a few years. People are pretty happy with it. I just applied it to this. Now, you know, it's never been applied to VoIP before, and that's what I'm doing. So this means you don't really have to check the short authentication string. You can be lazy. In fact, you could just never check it, ever, you know? Not the first time, not ever. Because you're still probably going to be safe, because probably there was no man in the middle in the first call. And if there wasn't in the first call, he can't get in later. So that means you could call somebody 100 times over the course of, say, a year, and you just never bother to check it, because you're always talking about the weather. But one day you talk about something that you don't want anyone to listen to. And so today you check it. On the 100th phone call, you check to see if the short authentication string matches. And you find that it does match. Good thing. That means there's no man in the middle in this call. But it also retroactively proves that there never was a man in the middle all the way back to the first call. That's a nice security property. It's kind of like never having to floss your teeth until the day you go to the dentist. Yeah.
Oh, then you too.
One of the nice properties of PGP is you can bootstrap from a known good contact to another known good contact. So if you're moving house or moving office, you can move from one phone to another or one email address to another and maintain the confidentiality. Sure. Can you do a similar thing with ZPhone?
Well, the difference here is that with PGP you have persistent keys. It's really important to have persistent keys when you're encrypting email, because you get an encrypted email and you want to decrypt it either right then, or maybe you want to decrypt it tomorrow or the next week or a year from now. or 5 years from now. You really need persistent keys. You got to keep them around indefinitely to decrypt mail that you got long ago. Phone calls aren't like that, you know. At the end of the phone call, you hang up and it's gone. You don't need to decrypt it anymore. It's gone. So it's all ephemeral. So if there's no persistent keys, well then, you know, you don't need to manage persistent keys. You don't need a public key infrastructure. Public key infrastructures are quite complex. The old-fashioned kind with centrally managed certificate authorities are extremely bureaucratic and difficult to manage. PGP does it a lot better than that. But even PGP does have some, you know, there is a kind of public key infrastructure. It's not the stupid one that you find in the X509 world, but it is a lot nicer, but it still is some kind of public key infrastructure. So, but you need to have it with PGP, but you don't need to have it with phone calls, so why drag that into it? Now, if you want to use another phone, just check the short authentication string again, or not, depending on whether you're talking about the weather or something important. So once you establish, all you got to do is check it once, and it just there's a key continuity that just keeps going for all the calls.
Ted Nelson, Oxford Internet Institute. First, do I understand from your saying that encrypted recordings cannot be broken into, that if you yourself wish to keep an encrypted recording and decrypt it later on, this will not work? And
well,
second, I think you said when we met earlier that you'd say something about the influence of my work on yours.
Ah, yes. It's short. Yeah. Okay. Well, first, let me say about the encrypted recordings. You can make encrypted recordings or plain text recordings. If you're going to encrypt them, you'll just have to encrypt them with some other key that you arrange yourself. And or maybe you don't want, maybe you want to make non-encrypted recordings.
So this particular method will not work for recording the encrypted string.
It's out of scope. It doesn't have anything to do with what kind of recording you make, encrypted or not encrypted. If you're going to encrypt it, you're not going to encrypt it with the session key that you use for that call. Because if you did record that session key, with your encryption, if you didn't re-encrypt it, if that means that somebody who wiretapped you could somehow get that key later and compromise the call retroactively. And as far as your influence on my work, when I went to college in the early 70s, I read Computer Lib and was quite excited by it. Ted Nelson invented hypertext, and I just thought it was an incredibly cool book. It has shaped a lot of things that we see today on the internet came from Ted Nelson, and his ideas of building Xanadu didn't materialize, but a lot of the other ideas yet. He's getting closer. But you don't have to. The perfect is the enemy of the good, and the fraction of his ideas that have been realized is so influential that even if he stopped everything today and didn't do anything more, we'd all benefit from what he did. But he's not. He's getting closer to getting Xanadu fully realized.
Yes. Stuart, and then pass it to Max.
Stuart Lee, Acting Director for the Computing Services. Phil, you may have heard of something called Cockney rhyming slang here in England, which originated from the criminal fraternity in the East End of London so that they could speak generally in front of policemen and say whatever their plans were, that the police wouldn't understand them. And although I accepted that there's been a levelling up, that the law enforcement agencies will want encryption as well, I'm still not convinced that people like the intelligence agencies, like the CIA, MI5, MI6, will not fight tooth and nail to stop encryption on VoIP because of the amount of information they're getting from phone tapping, legally or illegally.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Let me speak more about that. You know, in the United States, there's been a lot of discussion recently about NSA interception of immense numbers of phone calls. Now, we don't know the details of what it is they're doing with that traffic. But I'm kind of getting the impression from just looking at it from the outside that if you're looking at that volume of traffic, that a lot of it has to do with traffic analysis. And VoIP encryption doesn't really affect traffic analysis. In fact, it's actually pretty difficult to affect traffic analysis. You know, there is a popular misconception that all you have to do is just throw some intermediaries in the picture and you're done. You know, the onion router is an example. And, you know, if you're encrypting email, I'm sorry, if you're, well, I guess you would encrypt it too, but if you're trying to hide the traffic patterns of email, you can do that by having a lot of intermediaries, because you can delay it a lot and have it sit around for a while in some of the intermediaries and mix it with other mail. And if you, especially if you can delay it a lot, you might be able to get some measure of stopping the traffic analysis. But in the long run, it's extremely difficult to do, because they're going to notice that something comes out of this target and it ends up over at this target, and no matter what happened in between, they can see that. And when you make it be real-time communications like phone calls, it completely changes the problem. It means that you really cannot thwart traffic analysis. If the observer doing the traffic analysis can observe the endpoints, it doesn't matter what's happening in the middle. So nothing that I'm doing or any of the other VoIP encryption protocols are going to have any effect at all on the traffic analysis. We're just encrypting the content. And so, you know, I think that you get a lot of bang for the buck for the traffic analysis. I mean, look, if you're listening to the content, you're going to listen to some bad guys say, the birthday cake will be ready on Saturday. You know, first of all, they don't mean Saturday. And secondly, it's not a birthday cake, you know. What's important is to know who's calling who. You get a call from Pakistan to New York, and then they call 6 other people, you know, and you kind of map that out. You can do all that with encryption. Now, the effects on the criminal wiretapping, where the bad guys are wiretapping you, you know, they don't care about the traffic analysis. They care about the content. They want that content. So you're having actually a disproportionate effect on organized crime when you're encrypting the content. The NSA can still do a lot of its job. And, you know, it's not like we have a choice here. You really just can't you can't migrate to VoIP. It just can't happen without encryption. Yeah.
My name is Max Lobser. I'm a student here at OII. I was wondering whether moving to secure VoIP might actually slow down the process of migrating to VoIP as opposed to PSTN. Where you could run into problems, say, where key generation could slow down the time or increase the time between making the call and receiving the ringing signal,
Yeah.
or someone picking up and you
Because
hearing
the
a voice.
calculations might be, yeah.
And
Well,
also, you know, you said about reading out hashes. So I was wondering whether these things might discourage people from moving to VoIP.
reading our what?
Reading out the hash key to ensure that there's not a man in the middle.
Well, in most of the calls you wouldn't bother, because you're not really talking about things that you care about that much. But, and then you also have the key continuity properties. So you only have to do it once for calling the same person many times. Or maybe not at all, because, you know, there probably wasn't someone there in the first call. The calculations, there are efficient ways of doing the calculations. To do Diffie-Hellman, 3,000-bit Diffie-Hellman, even on a say a 200 megahertz ARM9, you can do that in a fraction of a second. It's not gonna, you're not gonna notice it. And in a lot of phones, you have more than an ARM9.
You said 3,000-bit key length?
Yeah.
How about on mobile devices?
They typically have at least that much horsepower. They're doing voice compression. They're running codecs, which, that's a lot of computing right there. If you got enough compute power to do codecs, you already got enough to do Diffie-Hellman. For breaking that with key exhaustion, you would need approximately a 3,000-bit Diffie-Hellman or a 3,000-bit RSA key. That would take roughly the same number of steps to factor it, It's not a linear relationship, though. For AES 256, you would need a grossly huge key, many, many thousands of bits long.
Are you encrypting before the codec, or are you replacing the codec?
No, you do the codec first, and then you encrypt it. On the other end, you decrypt it, and then decompress it. It's too late to compress it after it's encrypted. You're eliminating you're squeezing out the redundancy, and you just can't do that if it's encrypted. Yeah.
Jonathan Zitron, OII. Culturally speaking, today's kids and tomorrow's adults hate the telephone. They hate speaking, it seems, a lot of the time. They're IMing, they're Facebooking, they're writing on each other's walls, that sort of thing. So even apart from the idea that they don't seem to care about their privacy nearly as much as we do, how singular, how unique is the modality of voice, real-time voice communication, such that it needs its own distinct encryption and protection schemes against eavesdropping? Or is this just a specific application of a general problem of Alice and Bob want to talk to each other and they'd rather not have Charlie listen in?
I think that human conversations have been around for millions of years, and it's so elemental in our brain physiology, in the evolution of human beings, that it deserves a special place. People like to talk to each other. There's no substitute for that. This IM, instant message stuff, the stuff you do with, texting on your phones, that's all kind of cute and trendy, but it doesn't replace being able to whisper in someone's ear.
We had a couple of questions. Rob?
I'm Rob Ackland from the Australian National University, currently a visiting fellow here at OII. This might be quite an obvious question, but if we need encryption for VoIP, but as far as I'm aware, we don't have any encryption for standard phone lines. Is it the case that wiretapping VoIP is much easier than
it is much easier
than wire? And could you explain why that is?
Well, why it is? It's actually slightly different in how it works. With the public switch telephone network, there is a connection between you and the other party that goes on a single path. There's an electrical connection. Later, it was replaced with fiber optics, but it's still a single path. With the internet, your packets are swarming through the cloud, taking different paths. It means that the easiest place to wiretap a PSTN call is in the middle, at the switch.
Or at the person's house, like just
outside.
Well,
you could do it at the person's house, that's true, but they typically don't.
But if you're targeting a particular judge or something, that's what you do, isn't it?
But there was very little PSTN wiretapping by criminals. Empirically, that seems to be the case. Law enforcement did most of it, and they did it at the switch. You could do it at close to the target, but why bother? It's more convenient to do it at the switch. The switch is a controlled environment. It's the phone company. The government has easy access to it. They do it at the switch. But with VoIP, it's easier to do it at the endpoints because there is no middle. It'll go around. So it swarms out and does this and then reconverges over here. So you're going to do it here or you're going to do it here. Now, doing it close to the endpoints is not hard for somebody with the right spyware. They could either, get in there with the alligator clips, or they could get in there with a spyware on one of the computers. Maybe your PBX is the host for the spyware. A lot of these PBXs aren't really hardened that much to attack. And so that could be put there by the government, or it could be put there by the Chinese government, or by the Russian mafia, or by a freelance hacker. There's a company here in the UK called Borderware that Peter Cox, the CTO, has written software to do exactly that. He's got software that could be a spyware on a network and intercept all the VoIP traffic and store it as WAV files. And with a nice web browsable interface so that you can pick and choose which phone calls you want to listen to. And it plays them back through the web, through your browser. And your browser could be on the other side of the world. In fact, I've used it from California, and his server, he's got a little environment there where he's doing it on, is here in London. Well, this is not London, but it's close enough. From California, it all looks the same.
May we go here and then?
Arthur Thomas, it seems to me if I'm smart enough to install spyware on your machine that picks up the encrypted stream, I can also install spyware that picks up the clear text stream after you've decrypted it. Is that not the case?
That's right, you could. But if you're doing point-to-point encryption, then you can't. Now, you could put the spyware on the, let's say if you were running a soft VoIP client on a PC, you could put the spyware on the very same PC.
Right.
In which case, yeah, you could. But, my answer to that is, well, I use a Mac, so I don't worry about it.
Right. If I can access the driver that produces the sound signal that comes out of your speakers, then
yeah, you could.
I can also capture that stream and send it back to me.
Yeah, you could. But, also it could be a VoIP phone on my desk. It could be built into the phone.
Any security system is as good as the weakest point. So, in some moment you have to decrypt and convert the voice to can hear it. So how you take this in account? How you protect these points? Could be possible that any spyware get into your phone and save this conversation and transmit in any other way?
Yeah, you could. It could get into the phone, but if it's a dedicated hardware desktop phone, it's less likely that it's going to have spyware in it, because it's not a general purpose computer. People aren't downloading email and attachments and Trojan horses. They're not taking candy from strangers.
So you mean it is more difficult that somebody puts something in your phone?
Well, I'm not saying that all phones are hardened against that kind of thing. I mean, a lot of these phones these days are general purpose computers with also phone capabilities. But I would recommend that you not download games and other, and open email attachments on your pocket mobile phone. I think that I think in the long run, we're going to see your desktop enterprise phone is going to have VoIP encryption inside. It's just, in fact, it's going to have VoIP. It's going to be a VoIP phone. And people like to use phones, desktop phones. I think doing it on the PC is a nice temporary measure for people that travel, with a laptop. You need it in your hotel room. You're running some VoIP application in your hotel room.
Yeah, I thought that because now is a trend to converge the computers and the phones, so PDS you can play.
That's true. There's there's a company called Ripcord Networks that makes a whole operating system for desktop enterprise phones, and it's actually a form of free BSD, and it's an operating system, runs lots of different applications, and they're putting it in there. So this desktop phone will encrypt your calls. But, they better harden it against hostile software getting in.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mark Priestley, Vodafone Security Technologies Research Team. So ZPhone is obviously aimed at desktop phones, but I wondered whether you'd had any thoughts about how this could be applied in the mobile world, and specifically if there was any point in the future where you thought that something like ZPhone could remove the need for network operators to apply radio level security.
This phone right here is running Windows Mobile, and it has a mobile VoIP client running on it from a company called Tim. And they have integrated my SDK into their mobile VoIP client. So I can make encrypted calls from here to my laptop. Of course, that would be a rather silly thing to do. Because my laptop, I do it right here, just talking to both ends. You know? But anyway, yes, you can make secure calls through Wi-Fi or whatever kind of IP, GPRS, Edge, 3G. As long as you've got VoIP, wherever VoIP goes, you can do this protocol. You know, ZPhone is an application for running on your desktop computer or your laptop computer, but ZPhone is one application that runs the protocol. There's three things that I've got here. One is the protocol, which is, you know, in a specification. It's an internet draft. The other is an SDK that implements the protocol, and the third one is an application called ZPhone that has the SDK in it in an application. Now ZPhone sits in the IP stack of your computer and watches for the packets to go in and out of your computer from whatever VoIP client you like to use. So I've used it with several VoIP clients, and it'll encrypt all of them. And it's like a bump in the cord. It's between the VoIP client and the internet. It's like, imagine if it was a piece of hardware. It would be like a little device like this big, and it would have an Ethernet socket here and an Ethernet socket there, and it would be a bump in the cord. And here's the phone, here's the internet. Except it's in software and it's inside your laptop. But that's one way to do it. That's not the protocol. The protocol would be much better to put the protocol inside the VoIP client. Well, that's something that the VoIP client vendor would do. And that's what I do. I license it to VoIP client vendors. Not only VoIP client vendors, but PBX vendors. Borderware makes a kind of a VoIP security gateway, and they have it running inside that. It could go everywhere where there's VoIP. It could go to a PSTN gateway. So the VoIP would terminate right there, and it would be encrypted through the VoIP part, but the last 10 kilometers would be through the PSTN. So you would go across the ocean with VoIP encrypted. I mean, if I'm in Moscow giving a talk somewhere, and I want to make a phone call to California, I could be encrypted from my hotel room to, you know, my PBX at home. And then it would go to the PSTN out to somebody in Palo Alto, California. I don't care if it's encrypted there because my threat model is more concerned about, you know, Vladimir Putin listening to my call.
Thank you. John Pybus, Oxford Research Centre. So there is, you said earlier on that there's a need for encryption as we move to voice over IP, and therefore it's sort of inconceivable to do it without, and therefore governments are going to accept it. But the encryption doesn't necessarily have to follow the end-to-end encryption model that you suggested.
Yeah.
You could encrypt to a service provider and encrypt from service provider to another to the other client, and then you've got back to exactly the same model.
That's
as PSTN,
right. But you know,
and the government could fit a box in the middle, and they could mandate.
But when you go to your bank on your online banking, and you get on your web browser and you talk to the bank, you're end-to-end encrypted, right? Even if you're far away from the bank, you could be even in another country. But what if the government said that they wanted to make it so that you can be encrypted from your laptop to the internet service provider at your hotel, but then it terminates there, and then it gets re-encrypted from that internet service provider to the internet service provider at where the bank is in another country, and it terminates there. and then it's re-encrypted through another tunnel to the bank. You think the banks would stand for that? Do you think the bank customers would stand for that? I mean, that's not, we wouldn't accept that.
Probably not for a bank, but we already accept that with a standard telephone, so, you know.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I'd imagine that it would be only licensed over IP kind of vendors would be able to do this, and they would.
If you do that, you see, the thing is,
I'm not saying it will happen.
the SIP provider, you know, typically it goes to the SIP server, you know, and the SIP servers would then have the keys. In fact, one of the several methods for encrypting VoIP does what you just said. The problem is that your SIP service provider has the key. So you call somebody in China, and, well, his SIP service provider is, well, guess who that is, you know? That's the Chinese government. Do you want the Chinese government to listen to the call? I mean, you don't always have the good guys running the SIP servers. In fact, maybe the SIP servers have been penetrated by some bad guys. Maybe not the government, maybe what if it's somebody in Bulgaria? Well, you know, it's the phone company in Bulgaria, but, you know, organized crime controls that, perhaps. I don't know. I actually don't know anything about the phone company in Bulgaria or whether organized crime controls it. But, you know, organized crime does actually influence the police in Bulgaria quite a bit. And, in fact, it does it in a lot of countries in the East. So, you know, in Brazil, for $5,000 a month, you can get a complete recording of all of your business rivals' phone calls. It's just available. It's a free market price. You just pay the $5,000 a month, and you'll get recordings of your business rivals, all of his phone calls. That's what life is like in Brazil. You know.
Maybe we'll go back to York, but first, the gentleman on your right. Yeah.
Steve Matheson, Info Security Magazine. You mentioned you were doing some licensing already. How well developed is commercial availability? How is that progressing?
Well, you know, you've got Borderware here in the UK. They have it. There's a company called Ripcord Networks. If you go to my website, there's a page of customers and a bunch of companies that have signed up to license it. There's a popular open source PBX software called Asterisk that is we've already incorporated into that, and we're now in the test phase, and sometime next month we'll release it to the public. It's in a couple of different open source projects. It's there's a company called Counterpath that makes a popular VoIP client called Xlite and iBeam. It's now integrated into that. Just a few days ago, they got it working in those. Xlite is free. iBeam costs money. But they not only are those products available from Counterpath, but they OEM those products to to phone companies and to other companies. So there's going to be a big proliferation of products that have this protocol, ZRTP, running in them. Go take a look at the website and take a look at the ones that we only publish the ones that we know about, that we know we've got to deal with. One of them is PGP. They're going to be eventually rolling out products that do VoIP. Historically, they haven't been a VoIP company, but they protect data in motion, data at rest, all of your communications. You should have one-stop shopping for protecting your communications. So,
Yorick Wilkes, so I have a feeling the stupid question's been answered, but I can't quite see why, but you'll just remind me. Okay, so you've chosen to provide a VoIP, a protocol for VoIP that works either for any internet-based phone or an internet-based desk phone, right? And of course, in the old days of black and white movies, there was what was called scrambling for audio signals. I mean, presumably there must be some encryption out there for digital phones, whether land or mobile. Is it just you're not providing for them? That's why they haven't been mentioned. Because the whole focus has been on internet-based phones.
When you say digital phones,
well, the standard PABX, that we all have.
Yeah, I haven't I haven't bothered with that.
I think the answer is you just haven't bothered with it. It's not,
Yeah.
you can't buy it. It's not you can buy it.
Oh yeah, there are things you could get, but there's also been companies that have not done well financially creating those, and some of my friends have created businesses that attempted to sell to that market and went out of business.
But are they PGP based? I mean, those that do provide.
No, they're based on similar protocols, Diffie-Hellman, ephemeral Diffie-Hellman hash commitment displaying a short authentication string. But they failed because the manufacturing costs, the tooling, the lack of demand. I mean, PSTN is a fairly well-protected network. So the threat model is different. You don't have so much to worry about organized crime. You're more concerned about government wiretapping. Either your own government or foreign governments. I mean, you know, certainly governments buy those phones. Governments worry about other governments. There are some well-established companies, Motorola. Well, Motorola makes secure phones for the government. The Stu 3s are the well-known classic ones. There's other smaller, cheaper ones they make now. But I don't care about that market anymore.
No, I wasn't trying to get sure.
Yeah.
I just wondered if there was a gap there, and I just wondered if it had been there.
Yeah.
Good. Bill Dutton, if I could take the chair's prerogative and just wedge a question in here, hopefully not deflect the track here. But could you say something about this, the Uber geeks, this group of people who are thinking through the middleman kind of operation, and let me tie that also to your comment that you're imagining what NSA or law enforcement might think about what you do. I mean,
Oh yeah, I could be wrong.
to them? No,
I could be wrong,
but
but
talk to them. Are not they in the same group?
well, you know, I meet NSA people. They go to the same conferences I attend. You know, and they know the inevitability of VoIP, and they know the inevitability of having to encrypt VoIP. You know, they actually in the U.S. during the Clipper chip debate, and during even the export control debate. The NSA kind of recognized earlier than other government agencies of the inevitability of having to get rid of the export controls and especially abandoning the Clipper chip. The FBI hung on longer. They were the last government agency to let go. In fact, they never really let go. They just kind of, you know, got shouted down by the rest of the government.
But could you say something? What's about the sociology of your community of, I don't know, well, the Uber geeks, as you referred to the group. I mean, are you a community? I mean, do you talk to the good guys and the bad guys? And
well, I mean, you know, governments all over the world use PGP. So there has been an acceptance by governments of you know, commercially available strong encryption. I mean, we had to fight that battle in the 90s, but that battle is now over. And not only the US, but all the Western European governments, in fact, pretty much all the governments in the world, to some extent, use PGP. Not all of them pay for it, but every major government uses it. And so now of course there are some countries where it's illegal to use PGP or other strong encryption. If you use it in Burma, you know, they're going to kill you.
But what about these folks who are trying to crack these encryption codes? I mean, the criminal, you know, I mean, not governments, but
criminals are not going to be able to crack modern cryptography. You know, the algorithms used in PGP are taken from you know, civilian academia. You know, cryptography has progressed over the years to the point where now civilian academic cryptography is at parity with the NSA. You know, the electronics industry went through a period in let's say in the early 60s where integrated circuits were developed for satellites and guided missiles. You know, it was Pentagon money. And so the spending on microelectronics pretty much just came from the Pentagon. But at some time over the years, I don't know when it was, sometime in the 60s, I think, we crossed a threshold where there was more money coming from the civilian sector, driving the microelectronics industry. So the semiconductor industry was funded by, you know, consumer demand. And today, you know, the Pentagon buys its stuff off the shelf. They, you know, they get PCs, they run Windows to, you know, to drive naval ships, and then they get the blue screen of death, and then they have to be towed back into shore. So don't use Windows, but anyway, the civilian sector overtook the spending by the government on the electronics industry, and the same thing has happened with cryptography. There was a time 20 years ago or 30 years ago when it was exclusively under the control of the intelligence agencies of the major powers. I mean, I have a friend, a Russian friend, who was a cryptographer, who was on the board of advisors for PGP, and he, you know, he's a cryptographer in Russia. Well, the only way you could have a job as a cryptographer in Russia was to be in the KGB. It was illegal to be a cryptographer in Russia, you know, without working for the KGB. Well, today he's he's selling cryptography. In the U.S., it wasn't quite illegal, but it was pretty much all the jobs you could get was just in the NSA. But with the invention of public key cryptography in the 70s, in 1976, with the publication of the seminal paper New Directions in Cryptography by Whit Diffie and Marty Hellman, it created such excitement. It was the introduction of public key cryptography, the most profound idea that had come along in a long time in cryptography, and that changed everything. A lot of academic researchers jumped in because it was so then exciting to do cryptography. And over the next couple of decades, the field grew and grew, so that there was more money and more people working in cryptography outside in the private sector or in academia than there was inside the NSA. So at some point, we crossed a threshold where we pretty much reached parity with the NSA. And that's the way it is today. So, you know, the best crypto algorithms that are in the unclassified world today are out of reach of the major governments, are out of reach of all of the world's intelligence agencies for breaking them. And that's been true for quite a few years now, for the past 10 years. And it's going to be true for quite some time, I think. Now, PGP uses the very best of the algorithms from civilian academic cryptography. And so does zPhone. So, you know, organized crime is not going to cryptanalytically break any of these things. What they'll do is they'll insert hostile code into a computer, spyware, and they'll capture your keystrokes while you type your passphrase. Law enforcement has done that too. There was some mafia guy in the U.S. Some years ago, Nicky Scarfo, I think his name was, and he was using PGP. And the feds inserted a keystroke sniffer on his computer, captured his PGP passphrase, and then seized his computer, was able to decrypt his PGP private key, and thus was able to decrypt all his files, his emails, and everything. So.
We have just a few minutes left, and so we've got several more questions, but we will have a reception, and there'll be time for more informal questions. Yes.
Am I correct in understanding that ZRTP is a drop-in replacement for RTP?
Well, the original intent was to sort of make it be a shim. I mean, you would take out the RTP, in place of the RTP stack, you would stick in ZRTP, and you know, the RTP stream would be interrupted by this. Remember the bump in the cord analogy? Well, that stream, that's an RTP stream. ZRTP doesn't go through the signaling, the SIP signaling. It doesn't involve the servers. It doesn't involve the telephone company. It's quite unlike the other VoIP encryption schemes in that the signaling is not involved at all. Because I think that if you want to speak Navajo to your friend on the phone, you shouldn't have to clear it first with the phone company.
Okay, thanks. Jeff Sisson from Nominet, by the way. Sorry.
Thank you. Are there maybe one Did anyone still have a question? Yes. Okay, maybe a last question.
I think some of you might have used telebanking before, and it's also it's always quite.
Say that again.
I think all of us have used telebanking before, and it's always a complete nightmare when the bank tries to authenticate you, and when you ask the bank to authenticate themselves to me, they normally hang up on me and think I'm insane. So. So
good for you.
Yeah. Yes, and this is my question. Does your protocol allow for any way of optional authentication? So now with whom I'm
yes, it does.
talking with?
Yes, it does. You can have, if you have a public key infrastructure and you want to use it, you can use it. It doesn't depend on it. It doesn't depend on it to do the encryption. See, I think encryption is a separate problem from presenting credentials. But if you've got a PKI, you can use the PKI to digitally sign. You remember the short authentication string I mentioned? Well, you can digitally sign that with a persistent signature key that's backed by a PKI. So, you know, if you've got it, you can use it.
Excellent.
Maybe just to wind up, what research should be undertaken? What's not being done in universities around your area of research? Is there more work that should be done about how users do or do not use security measures, or is it a matter of computer science research or social research? Or
well, you know, there's a lot more that needs to be done for computer security. I understand you told me earlier today you don't have a crypto program here at Oxford, right?
Well, who do we have actually? We don't have a program per se. We have a couple of individuals. not at the OII, but we do have people interested in how people will put their password on their screen.
Well, there is a I see.
Sort of a social.
There's a need for data security engineers, cryptographers, and just people that look after all manner of data security problems, because there is, you know, the whole computer industry is bleeding out all their orifices and with their data security problems. You know, it's an extremely difficult problem. It's not just cryptography. The most difficult problem is keeping hostile software out of your computer. You're not going to do it with just you know, McAfee virus scan, you know, looking for signatures of viruses. It's an arms race.
And we do have research around that area, which we're proud to say.
Yeah. There is something. One more thing I'd like to cover here.
Definitely, please. You have time.
You know, there is things that are not related to cryptography that affect privacy and civil liberties that I'm very concerned about. And, you know, in Britain in particular, you've got millions of video cameras everywhere. Of all the countries in Europe, this is the most heavily surveilled. Who would have thought, you know? I do a lot of travel in Eastern Europe. In 1994, I visited Romania and gave a talk there. And I didn't have to explain to them, you know, why you should worry about privacy and civil liberties. You know, why you need to protect your communications. They already got it. You know, they had Ceausescu. And they didn't understand why we didn't get it. You have a good government right now. I know you don't like him because of his relationship with Bush. But, you know, compared to a lot of other governments, it's not bad. But, you know, someday in the future that could change. And if it does change, you'll wish you had the government you had today. But unfortunately, that government will inherit the surveillance infrastructure that you've so carefully built here. And we don't know what that government might do with it. They might use the power of the incumbency and with that surveillance apparatus to hang on to power. And it might be difficult to dislodge them. Most of you are engineers or are involved in producing engineers. And those engineers have to go out and make decisions about what kind of projects they work on, what are the social implications of what they do. I think you have to make people think, make your students think about the implications of what they design and how they design it. That don't just take the easy way out. And you know, if you have to do some kind of biometric thing for some application, don't centrally manage a biometric database. You know, make it localized. Put the biometric thing on a smart card, so that the only copy of the biometric specimen is in the pocket of the holder of the owner. You can do that. There are ways to design it. There are good ways to design it that it'll work when you do that. There's decisions that you can make as engineers, or your students as engineers can make, that you should try to encourage, to try to design things that are of benefit to society, and don't make things too efficient for the police. There's a temptation to try, in the interest of efficiency, to grease the skids, to make it a frictionless work for the police. But when you do that, you may be undermining democratic institutions later on. So try to think of the implications of what you do, what you design. So.
Excellent. It's always the dilemma of privacy, of the reality, the empirical reality versus the future potential. And how do you weigh that? And it's exactly the right issue. But anyway, let's thank our speaker, and then we can go.